Hello, everybody. We're going to continue with our discussion of Module 8. In Lesson 8.2, we're going to be talking about percents, fractions, and decimals, and how to write them as equivalent values. So writing percents as decimals and fractions. We can write a percent as an equivalent fraction or as an equivalent decimal. Equivalent percents, decimals, and fractions all represent equal parts of the same whole. All right, so in our first example, Lorenzo spends 35% of his budget on rent for his apartment. Write this percent as a fraction and as a decimal. All right, well, step one, to write the percent as a fraction. So 35%, we know percent means per 100. So simply write 35 over 100. And then we can reduce 35 1/100ths by dividing by a greatest common factor of 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 7/20ths is the same as 35%. Now, how would we write that as a decimal? Well, again, we said 35% was 35 hundredths. Well, we know how to write 35 hundredths. Okay, we've known that since back in fourth grade. So 35 hundredths, we simply write as 0.35. Okay, so 35% written as a fraction is 7/20ths, and as a decimal as 0.35. All right, so let's try a couple. So if we look at number 1, it says write each percent as a fraction and as a decimal. So 15%. Well, as a fraction, it would be 15 over 100. And now what would be the greatest common factor of 15 and 100? 5. So divide 15 hundredths by 5, and we get 3/20ths. All right, so the percent is 15%, the fraction is 3/20ths, and the decimal is simply 0.15. Okay. All right, I need to readjust this. All right, number 2. All right, number 2 is 49%. I'm sorry, 48%. So as a fraction, it would be 48 over 100. Now I know 4 is a factor of 48 and 100. So if I divide 100 by 4, I get 25. If I divide 48 by 4, I get 12. So 12/25ths is the same as 48%. And as a decimal, 48 hundredths is written as 0.48. All right. Number 3, 80%. Okay, as a fraction, it would be 80 over 100. This time I know 20 is a common factor for both 80 and 100. So if I reduce that, I get 4/5. And 80 hundredths as a decimal is 0.080. 75%. 75 over 100. And these are quarters, so I know the quarter is a common factor to both. 75 divided by 25 is 3, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 75% is the same as 3/4, and 75 hundredths is the same as 0.75. 36%. 36 over 100. Remember, percent means per 100. 36 hundredths. I'm going to divide that by 4. 36 divided by 4 is 9, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. So 9/25ths. And 36 hundredths as a decimal is simply 0.36. And our last one, 40%. Just 40 over 100. Divide by the common factor of 20. 40 divided by 20 is 2. And 100 divided by 20 is 5. So 40% is the same as 2/5, and 40 hundredths is written as 0.40. All right, so that's great when we can make a fraction into 100. Real simple to convert it into percent and decimals. All right, so let's look at part A of the Explore activity on page 212. Use models to help you understand how decimals, fractions, and percents are related. So let's model 78 hundredths by shading a 10 by 10 grid. 78 hundredths means 78 out of 100. So shade 78 out of 100 squares. Okay, so we've shaded 78 hundredths. So as a decimal, 78 hundredths is 78 out of 100. 78 out of 100, which is 78%. Model 1 and 42 hundredths. Well, 1 means 1 whole, right? So we can shade in the whole 10 by 10 grid. And then we're going to shade 42 of the second one. Okay, so we've got 42 hundredths of the second one. So what is that as a fraction? Well, 1 whole is 100 100ths, right? If we simplify that, we get 1 whole. 42 hundredths is simply 42 over 100. So if we add those two fractions together, we get 142 hundredths. And that makes sense. We have 142 squares shaded. So we know that we can say 1 and 42 hundredths as 1 and 42 over 100. Now we could simplify 42 hundredths, right? If we took and divided by 2, let's see. Well, we can start with 2. That would give us 21 50ths. Yeah, so that would be, so in simplest term, it would be 1 and 21 50ths. So 1 and 42 hundredths as a percent is 1 plus 100% plus 42%. It gives us 142%. All right, C, model 125%. So we know that 125% means that there's 100% of one at least. 100% of something. And then the 25%, as we look at the other one, it means that's 25% of the second square or second object. So 25% is the same as 25 hundredths. So we have 125 squares circled. Not circled, but shaded. And so 125% as a decimal is 1.25. We can write 125% as fractions. So 100 100ths represents this part. This part is 25 hundredths. And 125 out of 100. So we have 1 and 25 hundredths. I can simplify 25 hundredths by dividing by 25, which gives me 1 and 1/4. All right, number 7. What decimal, fraction, and percent equivalencies are shown in each model and explain? Okay, well, let's start with just counting the number of squares in the grid. Okay, in A, I have 10 plus 3. So I have 13 out of 100. Well, then as a decimal, that would be 0.13. And as a percent, 100 means percent. Or I'm sorry, percent means per 100. So 13 100ths would be 13%. And we can say 13 out of 100 parts are shaded to explain that idea. Okay. And part B, we have 100 here, and we have 10, 20, 30. So we have 130 squares shaded out of 100 per rectangle. So that's our fraction. If I reduce that, I can divide by a factor of 10, and that would give me 13 tenths, which is the same as 1 and 3 tenths. Okay, so 1 and 3 tenths, which as a decimal would be 1.3 or 1.30. Either way is fine. And as a percent, we have 130 per 100. So 130%. How can we explain that? Well, we have one whole and 30 out of 100 parts shaded. Right, let's go to page 213. So how can we write fractions as decimals? Okay, so you can write some fractions as percents by writing an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. This method is useful when the fraction has a denominator as a factor or a multiple of 100. So that's what we've been doing. It's been real easy. But what if a fraction does not have a denominator that is a factor or multiple of 100? Well, in that case, we can use long division to get a fraction. To get a decimal. And then we can change that decimal back into a fraction or into percent. So let's look at this. 96 out of 200 animals treated by a veterinarian are horses. So write 96 200ths as a decimal and as a percent. Well, in this case, we notice that 96 200ths, we notice that 200 is a multiple of 100, right? So if we take 96 and 100 and divide by 2, we'd get 48 hundredths. So if we have 48 hundredths, then the decimal equivalent is just 0.48. And 48 hundredths, again, is just 48%. I have a real hard time with my display today for some reason. All right. Sorry, guys. All right. Now, how about this one, though? In part B, we have 1/8 of the animals treated by the veterinarian are dogs. And wants us to write 1/8 as a decimal and as a percent. Well, 1/8 is not a multiple. 100 is not a multiple of 8. The closest we'd get there is 96, because 8 times 12 is 96. So what we're going to do is go ahead and divide. Use long division. Divide the numerator by the denominator. And so we're going to add a decimal point and zeros to the right of the numerator as needed. So you can see as we do the long division, we wind up with 0.125. And we read that as 125 thousandths. Okay, well, So as a percent, this is 125 out of 1,000. We want it out of hundredths, right? So let's divide the numerator and the denominator by 10. 1,000 divided by 10 is 100, and 125 divided by 10 is 12.5. So now it's easier to write the percent. 12.5 out of 100 is 12.5%. And as the decimal, we already have that. We have it as 0.125. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and practice a couple. All right. So write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. 9/25. Well, this one is actually an easy one because 25 can become 100. All we have to do is multiply by 4. So we get 36 hundredths. All right, well, 36 hundredths is 0.36. And as a percent, it would be 36%. All right, now number 9, 7/8. Well, so 7/8, we're going to divide 7 by 8. We're going to add decimal point and zeros as needed. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, we get 6. Let's add another 0. 8 times 7 is 56. We subtract, we get 4. Let's bring down another 0. And 8 times 5 is 40. So our decimal is 0.875. Now this is read as 875 thousandths. Let's divide by 10. And we'd get 87.5 over 100. Okay. So 87.5 out of 100 means it's 87.5%. Okay. All right, number 1. Helene spends 12% of her budget on transportation expenses, and we need to write that percent as a fraction and as a decimal. All right. So 12%. Well, as a fraction, it's 12 out of 100. Well, that means we can simplify that by dividing by a greatest common factor of 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. So 3/25 is equal to 12%. Let's go back to the 12 100ths. That tells us the decimal. 12 hundredths is written as 0.12. All right, model the decimal, then write percent and equivalent and fraction equivalents. 53 hundredths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 50, and we need to shade 3 more in the next row. So we have 53 hundredths shaded. So 0.53 is the same as 53 hundredths, which is the same as 53%. Okay, 3. 1 7 hundredths. So we have 1 whole and 7 out of 100. So 1 7 hundredths is 107 out of 100. we can write that as a mixed number of 1 and 7/100ths. As a percent, it would be 107 per 100, so 107%. All right, write 4 and 5. Write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. 7/20ths. Well, I know 20 can become 100 by multiplying by 5. So 20 times 5 and 7 times 5. So I have 35/100ths. Okay, well, as a decimal, that's 0.35. And as 100, it's 35 per 100. So 35%. 3/8 of a pie. So we're going to have to take the 3, divide by 8. 8 times 3 is 24. Subtract, we get 6. Okay. 8 times 7 is 56. Subtract, we get 4. So we get 0.375. That's the decimal. And the percent, we know the decimal is read as 375 thousandths. If we divide it by 10, we get 37.5 over 100. So the decimal, the percent is 37.5%. All right, number 6. How does the definition of percent help you write fractions? Write fraction and decimal equivalents? Okay, well, let's start with the word percent. Percent means per 100. So any percent can be written as a fraction. Okay, so percent means per 100. So any percent can be written as a fraction with a denominator of 100. And then that can be written in simplest form. Okay, so if we can reduce the numerator and denominator, we want to do so. And then any fraction can be turned into a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. Any fraction can be written as a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. All right, so percent means per 100. So that means any percent can be written as a fraction with a denominator of 100. If you say the percent's 39%, I know that as a fraction, I can write 39 over 100. And I can write any fraction as a decimal by dividing the numeral, I left out the word dividing, by dividing the numerator by the denominator. Now in 39 over 100, there's no need to write that as divide that out. We just know 39 hundredths is 0.39. But like in our examples of 1/8, we would divide that and we'd find out the decimal is 0.125. Okay. All right, so we're going to pause there for the first part. And next time we get together, we'll talk about the independent practice. So until then, I'll see you soon.